Hey there, and welcome to Broadband Deployment News. The state of Minnesota says that they have an estimate now of how much BEAD money they're going to get. They say this is from the federal government. How accurate is it? I don't know. Be right back. Thanks for joining me. Rick Husey here with Broadband Deployment News. As I mentioned, the state of Minnesota has been given a figure. And I'm assuming since they've been given a figure that maybe some other states have been given a figure, but don't know that for sure. But I thought I'd read through this. I thought this was an interesting story on what they've been told. And again, not sure how accurate this is. I can make some assumptions on how accurate it is or isn't. But some interesting stuff in here. So officials estimate remarkable $650 million for Minnesota broadband from the infrastructure bill. Minnesota could be in line for an unprecedented windfall of money to help build high-speed internet in rural areas. Every state was promised a minimum of $100 million for broadband development from the Federal Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act passed by Congress late last year, but some states could get more based on need. Really, a lot of states are going to get more. There might be a few, very few states that maybe get the $100 million because they're small states and they've got maybe smaller, much smaller areas of rural populations, unserved and underserved areas, but I think we would expect most states to get more, at least I would. Now, Minnesota officials have an estimate of that extra cash, $550 million, so that they're saying that would bring Minnesota up to $650 million for broadband from the infrastructure bill. In other words, their original, for certain $100 million that they're going to be allocated, then based on need, an additional $550 million, bringing them up to $650. A sum that would far eclipse any government spending in the state for developing high-speed internet in recent memory. Minnesota's Department of Employment and Economic Development cautioned that the projection is just a rough estimate and could change. It also wouldn't be enough for universal broadband access at blazing fast speeds. So they're already saying $650 million isn't enough. In fact, we'll see here in a little bit, somebody says it's maybe only half of what they need. But if the end result is anything close to $650 million, Minnesota's goals for the high-speed internet connection will be much closer to reality. What was in the, oh, and by the way, so, how is this accurate? So again, or how accurate could it be? So again, I think that if they're getting a number, then very possibly other states are getting numbers. I don't know if they had to supply additional information, like maybe mapping information that they have, or if the FCC is just relying on the current maps that they have and what they know is, well, not just FCC, NTIA, the current maps that the FCC has, and what the NTIA knows is coming down the pike with some federal programs, those kinds of things, and maybe what's in the ground already. Or I don't know if Minnesota supplied their own information, but it may be through the state representative that the NTIA has for each state. So supposedly, I don't know if they were able to find enough people, but they were supposed to get one person for each state that would be their liaison with the NTIA. So this would be an NTIA employee that would be working with that state alone on their needs. I don't know if they ever got that, but it could be that the liaisons are working with the states and saying, okay, here's how much you could expect, maybe. And I would bet it would be a conservative amount, but we don't know that for sure. So what was in the federal infrastructure bill? 1.2 trillion infrastructure bill, we knew this, 65 billion for broadband, and then 42.5 billion of that earmarked for the states to distribute. So in addition to that 42.5 billion, you've got 14 billion, I think, for the Affordable Connectivity Program that's run through the FCC. Then you've got, I think, the Digital Equity Access program, what else? The Tribal Broadband Program. So there's some funds in addition to that 42.5. Diane Wells, Deputy Director of DEED's Office of Broadband Development, said the federal government recently gave Minnesota an estimate of how much money it could receive so the state could start planning. So all states have stepped up and said, yeah, we want to participate. So they're going to now be able to get their planning funds, which is basically 5% of the $100 million that they know they're going to be allocated. So each state can get $5 million for planning. Part of that is to be able to create maps and determine what the need is. So they've got that information. So it says they're expecting to get more, let's see, cash is distributed based on need. So Kevin McKinnon, a deputy commissioner for DEED, said the relatively rural Minnesota was expecting to get more cash compared to states that are more urban and well connected to the internet. And certainly that's going to be the case. It also has to do with how big a state is versus, how small a state is as well. The final amount Minnesota will get won't be known until later and is dependent on maps of areas without access to broadband that the feds need to update. Minnesota also must submit a plan for how it would use the money over a 5-year period. So they've not yet submitted this plan. So one of the reasons that I think this is a kind of a wild guess by the NTIA is that they have a rough idea, but there's lots of variables in here that's going to determine what how much money each state's going to get. Some of that is, there's just a lot of broadband going in the ground right now. There's you'll read stories every day about new fiber deployments, and this would be from smaller independent operators to, big MSOs and big companies that are deploying fiber without getting federal money. So the lay of the land is changing as right as I'm speaking here. Plus, that's fiber, but then you've got 5G service from people like T-Mobile and T-Mobile, Verizon, and AT&T. Sprint is now kind of T-Mobile wrapped up in that. But you've got those major cellular carriers that are now deploying 5G broadband, and this is through licensed spectrum. Okay, so this is not, I don't believe any of it is unlicensed spectrum. So this 5G broadband that's going to give people over 100 by 20 megabits per second is considered reliable broadband. So if these areas show up on a map as unserved, I can guarantee you that these cellular carriers are going to step up and challenge that and say, wait a minute, we're providing 5G broadband service through this swath of area, through our network of fixed wireless. So this would be fixed wireless 5G. In other words, you get a device, you put it in your house, to broadcast the wireless signal, like a wireless signal throughout your house, just like you would fiber connection or a cable connection. You get a wireless router, you're going to broadcast the signal. So we're talking about fixed wireless over 5G that's going to be taking big swaths of area off the map. So we really don't know the lay of the land yet until the FCC maps come out, and then really until after the challenges come out between the service providers that say, wait a minute, I'm providing service here. There's going to be some challenges where people are going to say, wait a minute, you say there's service here and there's not. But I think there's going to be more challenges that say, hey, we're providing service here, or we plan on it, and here's where we are in the process. So we're going to be seeing a lot of that. Let's see, and this is true here. He says, McKinnon said it could take roughly a year before Minnesota gets any money to spend under the infrastructure bill program, known as Broadband Equity, Access, and Employment, or BEAD. So it could take a year before any of this money is distributed because of those things. It also mentions they have to submit the 5-year plan. So something else that I think that's going to impact how far this money goes is, in these plans, the states are going to tell the NTIA how much of a match they're requiring. There's a minimum match of 25%, but in the scoring of BEAD, it provides a priority if somebody's willing to match more. So if one service provider says, hey, we'll put in 50% of this, not just 25, but we'll put in 50% of this. Well, that's going to make that money go a lot further. So we really don't know how far this money is going to go. So there's $42.5 billion that can be allocated, and then how far that goes depends on how much broadband is deployed by the time this money is finally released, and then also how much matching funds are going to be coming in. Because if you get a lot of matching funds in, then that money is going to go even further, which means states are going to get more money than they originally anticipated. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with this number. Again, I think it's probably pretty conservative, because I don't think the NTIA wants to promise something that they can't deliver on. They're probably thinking, okay, worst case scenario, 25% match with the broadband that we know is available right now. Maybe that's where that number is coming from. And once we get more of these areas covered by broadband and they get more of a match, then the amount of money they could get could go even further, because there'll be fewer areas that they have to serve and they're getting more money from the match, so that money can go further. So that's what I would anticipate. Minnesota's money is expected to be spent entirely on deployment of internet, primarily subsidizing the development of infrastructure, traditionally fiber optic cable, in places where it would be too expensive for internet providers to otherwise justify. Legislators this year directed the state to use $110 million from the American Rescue Plan, or ARPA, stimulus program passed under Biden for broadband infrastructure. In 2021, the legislature approved $70 million from the plan for broadband development. Minnesota was also was in line for another $408 million. So that's almost as much as they were promised here, from a grant program run by the Federal Communications Commission, or the FCC. So this is talking about RDOF here. Now that money comes from USAC or the USF funds. It says, but $311 million of that cash was awarded to one company, LTD Broadband, which was recently rejected by the FCC. Starlink, which was initially awarded $8.4 million in Minnesota, was also rejected. So they're talking about 300 and roughly 20 million, almost 320 million here through RDOF that Minnesota was not going to get because they had such a big chunk of that from LTD Broadband. It says here the money is expected to be redistributed for broadband by the FCC, though it's not clear how much will be dedicated for Minnesota. And honestly, I don't know if any of that's true. Nobody's heard what the FCC is going to do about this. It's my opinion that they're not going to try to say, try to redo this now with RDOF. Now that, when RDOF started, there was no IIJA, there was no BEAD, there was none of that, right? So now that there's that money out there and pending, and they're working on these maps, I don't think they're going to come out and say, okay, we need to get somebody else to take over this RDOF bid. Who is the next bidder, or does anybody else want to bid on this? I don't think they're going to do that. I don't know if they're going to just say, hey, we're going to put this money back in USF and decide how we can use that to improve broadband, maybe throughout the whole country. Or if they're going to shift money that was destined for Minnesota into their pot of money that they're supposed to get through IIJA, if the NTIA and FCC can work that out. I don't know how that's going to happen. Nobody does at this point. How far would the infrastructure money go? Well, again, a lot of that depends on these other factors that I talked about. But it says here, Minnesota currently has 2 goals in law for broadband access across the state. One is for every home to have access to internet with download speeds of at least 25 by 3, no later than 2022. So this shows you the moving target. So they've got in law something to get them to at least the underserved level, right? Because in the BEAD program, you've got 2 levels. You've got unserved, which is anything over 25 by 3, or excuse me, anything under 25 by 3. So that would be folks like this here. And then anything over 25 by 3, but less than 100 by 20 is considered underserved. So this doesn't even get them, this just gets them to the bare underserved minimum. But the state also has a faster speed goal of 100 by 20 by 2026, which has been the primary focus of Minnesota broadband officials. So they've been really working on that 100 by 20 number as opposed to the 25 by 3. But again, they've got that goal by 2026. In October, the state estimated about 88.5% of Minnesotans have access to wireline internet like DSL, cable, and fiber at speeds of 100 by 20. So that's, so they're saying over 88, almost 90% are at that 100 by 20. And in March, before the legislature approved 120 million for broadband, DEED officials said they would conservatively estimate the cost of meeting the 2026 goal for adequate broadband at $1.3 billion. So that's a lot of money. And they're only getting 600, well, they say they're only getting 650 million, at least the estimate right now. Now, maybe it'll be closer to 1 billion by the time, again, all the money is calculated and all the matches are in. Maybe they'll be able to get close to that number. And maybe that number is not correct, this estimate of 1.3 billion. It could be that, again, with all the stuff that's happening right now and all, it may not be that expensive. Daniel Lightfoot, a lobbyist for the League of Minnesota Cities, said the federal estimate was exciting to hear and higher than expected, but he said it doesn't completely solve the problem of lack of broadband access. If it was 650 million total, that's about half of what we would need to meet that goal, Lightfoot said. So it's a big number, but also the need is huge too. So again, don't forget about 5G and what that's going to do to the amount of money that's needed with that being considered reliable broadband, because it's fixed wireless access. And like I say, these large carriers that have got this mid-band spectrum is licensed spectrum. This is not like unlicensed CBRS that I am aware of. I think it's all C-band spectrum, and it's PCS mid-band spectrum that that T-Mobile had that is licensed. So these are areas that they can cover pretty quickly by getting up some 5G towers, and then they can broadcast that signal. So that's another thing that can drive down the amount of areas in Minnesota and therefore the amount of money that they'll be eligible for. So, and the amount of money that they'll need to be able to get people up over 120. Now, it may not be, a lot of folks may not be happy that this will lock out fiber in those areas. So if you've got some 5G operators that are providing service over 100 by 20 and there's not a fiber operator there, then you're missing the competition of that fiber operator. And, a lot of people would say that you're missing the kind of the future-proof nature of fiber where, you can do easily 1 gig symmetrical, 10 gig symmetrical. Now there's 25 gig symmetrical that they're starting to offer in Chattanooga. It costs a fortune. It's like $1,500 a month. So there's not any, very few people are going to be taking them up on that right now, but it is the future, right? So anyway, a lot of people will not be happy about that, but that's just the way it is, and that does provide good internet to people as long as there's enough spectrum and the service is reliable. So we'll have to see how that plays out. So anyway, pretty interesting stuff there from Minnesota. Again, I assume that other states are maybe interacting with their representatives and getting similar kinds of figures now that they've said, yeah, we want to participate. I would imagine that people are now trying to calculate the number that state could maybe count on so that they can do some planning. And then again, they may be able to get a lot more based on the final numbers of matching, but maybe it will be less based on however many places are covered by broadband that's not yet in the ground or in the air, again, with this 5G out there. So we'll have to see. Thanks for joining me. If this was interesting or helpful, please give me a thumbs up on the video. I'd appreciate that. And click the subscribe button. If you're not subscribed, make sure you click the little bell to be notified when I'm live. And I will see you next time. Tomorrow excuse me, did I knock my mic off? No, I'm good. Tomorrow on Tech Tuesday, I'm live tomorrow at 3 o'clock on Tech Tuesday. I'm going to be talking about CALEA. There's a pending new requirement for service providers. Every service provider is supposed to have CALEA in place. I think maybe smaller ones or really small ones don't have to do this, but CALEA is an act that says you have to be able to do basically a live trap of information, broadband for doing a live intercept of information if you've got maybe a terrorist threat or something like that. And could be other kinds of things that the FBI comes in and say, hey, we need you to do this live intercept. And service providers have to have the equipment in place and the policies in place to be able to do that and then get that information to the law enforcement agency in the proper format. And they also have to have a plan filed. They have to have a plan on their procedures and policies. And it's been kind of loose on whether they had to send that information to the FCC on that plan. But now the FCC is looking for comment on making a portal where people have to file it in this portal. So I'm going to do something about that tomorrow. So if CALEA is something that's on your mind or you don't know about, you might want to join me for that. I'll be going over CALEA tomorrow at 3 o'clock on Tech Tuesday. So I appreciate your time. Thanks a lot. Talk to you later. Bye-bye.